just so it's been quite a long break. So let us go back to the model a bit and talk about what we were doing. So just to remind you, this is so two period models, but with overlapping generation, meaning there's one young generation that is actively working today, so earning some money, and that or not earning money actually. I should be precise. So producing something, and that production is omega. And what we say is that so in the first period, so in the active period, there is a production of omega. Everybody produces the same, so you can't choose what you produce. You just produce that. And then when you're old, so you retire and you don't produce anything. So it means that at most, when you're young, you could consume all of what you produced. So your maximum consumption would be Ct of T, which would be simply omega. You would consume anything. And of course, this means that this is consumption for of generation T in time T. Well, that generation would have to then eat 0 in period T minus 1. So here we would be. Of course, then what they can do is buy money. So sell some of these goods that they produce to the actual older generation in hope that the next period when they're old, then they can use this paper money and exchange it back for some goods that the next generation is going to produce. What are they going to be able to consume at that later period? Well, omega, again, at most. So if they keep everything, if they save everything, but it's maybe not a good strategy since they're going to die of hunger. But what they could, in principle, do is consume at most omega, but divided by 1 plus pi t, which is the inflation at time t. So here we define inflation at time t as the increase in prices from time t to period t plus 1. So yeah, this is a matter of definition. So in the exam, don't worry, in some places you can find that inflation in period t is the increase of the value of money now compared to last period, or next period compared to now. So this, of course, would just vary if we talk about t or t plus 1 or t minus 1. So this is exactly the kind of thing that I will clearly define in a exam question, so you don't have to worry too much about this. Okay, and so we said that we don't really care about the corner solution if it's just consumption in the future, but we can analyze this solution there, which is eating everything you have in the present and not keeping anything for old age. But we expect that, or we hope that what solution would be the most the solution would be the most logical would be an interior solution in which we choose to consume some of our endowment or our work in period t and t plus 1. And now we've had finished with this. So yeah, so this quickly, this is the equivalence of interest rate, real interest rate to inflation. And what this says is that so in this model we don't have nominal interest rate because I cannot lend money to somebody and hope that that same person will be able to repay me next time, because if I am young and I lend money, it would be to some other young person, but they don't care, they don't need to. So some other old person, but they're going to not be around next time. So there's no financial market, but we can still say that the interest on money is essentially what you have to pay to make up for the fact that you lose consumption because of inflation. So here, 1 plus inflation divides so it's omega divided by 1 plus inflation, meaning that if you weigh, there is this quote unquote tax that you have to, or interest that you have to pay on the consumption that you can afford over time. And this is what we're going to call the RT money, which is simply minus inflation over 1 plus inflation. And it's about minus inflation at time t for values of 1 plus inflation t, which are close to 1. So if by t is small, so if the period is increment is small, or if if inflation is small. And we had finished with this quiz now. So I'm just going to go over the answer. No time to do it again. Where is it? Oh, I had the wrong one open. Okay, let me share that. Okay, so question 1. In the interior solution, what happens to CT if inflation goes up? So do I have an opinion?
It increases.
Good, why?
Because it's more expensive to keep money for later.
Yeah, good. So you're of the same opinion as a famous economist. Let me show you his quote here. Oh, yeah. So that's Tyler Cohen in the New York Times. So he says, so he was talking about what we should do to stimulate the economy, and he said the following. So if the Federal Reserve promises to keep interest increasing the money supply until prices rise by, say, 3% a year, then people should eventually start spending. Otherwise, if they just held the money, it would be worth 3% less each year. So that's so here that's exactly this quote unquote tax on keeping money. So if you just keep if you don't spend it, then you can't spend as much in the next period. Okay. Oh yeah. Sorry. Now I'm not showing it to you. Okay. Well, you're going to see it later. So yeah. So that's what he said. And then, oh, the answer is ambiguous. So what's up with that? Why is it ambiguous? It sounds good though. It sounds very plausible to me. By the way, it's not an easy question. It's a difficult question. So it's if you didn't think about it or get it, it's perfectly reasonable. It's a difficult macro.
Because it depends on how much it changes and how is built the utility functions.
Yes. So it depends is always a right answer, but kind of not precise enough. You can always can see that sometimes, but So we've just seen that there is so basically money has less value in the future. So I want to substitute consumption from the future to the present. So that is what we called, if you remember your classes, earlier classes, if you've seen them. Um, uh, oh, wait, did I do that with you last time? I'm not sure anymore.
Is that income and substitution effect?
Yes, but so did I correct the quiz with you? I was, because it's
Oh,
been,
no.
no, I didn't. Okay, okay.
No.
I was unsure about it. Okay. Yeah, so exactly. So now we've just talked about the substitution effect. So what would would the income effect look like? So let me go back to questions. Oh no, here. So imagine that I have an income effect and I just reduce how much people make per year. So I reduce omega. So it means that so this line stays the same, but the slope stays the same, but the line shifts down to like this, for instance. And here I would have a reduction in consumption, probably in the present and in the future. But here what happens is, so pi changes, but so if pi increases, then the line doesn't shift downward. It kind of becomes like this, for instance. But we see that the net effect on period one is not that clear, because on the one hand, there is this substitution effect that comes from the fact that the relative value of money is different between the present and the future. But there's also the income effect, which comes from the fact that if prices, if the value of money is reduced because prices are higher, then my purchasing power is reduced as well. So if I interpret this, what I would say is, well, I'm tempted to consume more today because my money is worth more, but at the same time, I'm going to be super poor tomorrow. So maybe instead of consuming more, I should actually save more to keep money to be still able to not starve too much when I'm old. So you see that there's this conflict in my head. So that's why the net effect in period T is ambiguous. But then what will be the effect, the substitute? So what I'm saying is substitution effect and income effect have different sign in period T. Then the question is, would they have different sign or equal sign or the same sign in period T plus 1?
The two effects are negative?
Yes, because there's two things that go on for tomorrow. First of all, I'm poorer because I have less purchasing power, and also it makes less sense for me to. So there's no way that inflation is going to make me consume more in the future. Okay, so but don't panic. This is just to start again the gears of micro and understanding what's going on, but it's not an easy thing. And even Tyler Cohen, who I really admire as an economist, when I read what he wrote in the New York Times, I thought, oh, I'm disappointed. Because if there's more inflation, then people may say, sure, I'll spend more today, but maybe I should just save more to make up for it tomorrow. All right. So let me go back to responses. So that was, oops. So that was 2. So 2, of course, goes down. This is a right answer. And 3, in the corner solution, what happens to CTT if inflation goes up?
Doesn't change because inflation does not impact CTT.
Yes. Yes, so you say the answer is A because the answer is A. So it's...
No, because if you have a corner inflation, it can only be with CT because if you do not consume in year T, you will die. And so then you do not care about inflation because you care about inflation in matter of T+1. So it doesn't change.
Okay, I'm not entirely convinced. Is there some other opinion? So just to be precise, if somebody or some generation has chosen the corner solution, so of course, if I'm saying, assume that the generation born in period T always chooses the corner solution, then what happens if there's a asteroid that it hurts? Well, I said that to assume that they always consume at the corner solution. So no matter what changes, then they don't change. So the thing is, imagine that they choose that. So would they change their mind if inflation went up?
They would not, for the same reason as question 2.
Okay, yes. And for one reason is that there is no income effect in that case. So maybe that's another way of saying the same thing. So let me go back to my graph.
Sir?
Yes?
Excuse me, can you just explain what is the income effect and the substitution effect?
Okay, substitution is when relative prices change. So here, relative prices are 1 over 1 plus pi t. So 1 plus, because the price of consumption now is 1, so it's omega what I earn, what I produce, divided by 1, the price today that I choose as numerator. And the price of consumption tomorrow is, again, what I kept, but divided by 1 plus pi t. So then the substitution effect is the change in the relative prices between tomorrow and today. So it's a change in the slope here. And the income effect is a shift in the slope. So if I just shifted, so if I didn't change the slope at the slope, but I just shifted this budget constraint down or up, then again, this decision would be impacted. No, I'm not obviously not going to draw the income effect and substitution effect. We could do it, but that's a micro class. But yeah, it's a good question. It's thanks for asking. Surely, if you didn't remember, other people didn't remember too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then so to answer, so here what happens in the corner solution? Well, if inflation is, say, this, so the reason why we chose the corner solution is that we already have a very high inflation. Otherwise, maybe we would have chosen an interior solution. And then if inflation goes up again, so it goes even low, it's going to be even lower. So of course we can see visually that we stay there. But analytically, or not analytically, but yeah, analytically, what this means is the slope is the changes as well, but there's no change in purchasing power because I already decided to consume everything now. So no matter what the prices are tomorrow, well, if no matter the fact that prices increase again tomorrow, then it doesn't impact me. Of course, if I asked, what if inflation decreases, then oops, this goes back up. And maybe I would not choose corner solution, but choose an interior solution. So that's why it's not ambiguous in that case. Yeah, and then for the same reason, I stay at the corner for if inflation increases. So in period CTT plus 1, I still consume 0. Okay, what would be the real interest rate on money, our money, that corresponds to an inflation rate of pi t that goes to plus infinity? Oh yeah, when I use this symbol, it means the limit of pi t when pi t approaches positive infinity. So that's what it means. Well, actually, this, you just have to apply the equation I gave you, but maybe you remember.
-1?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, most of you got it right. So you just apply the equation. It means if inflation is infinite, then my money is worth 0 tomorrow. So in terms of interest, it's like if I have to pay an interest of 100%. So the bank, I ask for a loan, and the bank says, I'm not going to give you back anything at all. So you lose everything. So the interest rate is not 5%, it's 100%. And here, just the trick is to, what was a bit difficult is to remember that to not use the approximation that I gave you, that pi t is the interest rate on money is approximately equal to minus the inflation rate. That's true if the inflation rate is very small, but here, if it approaches infinity, then it's obviously not the case. Then 5, if with pi t approaching in a plus infinity, what type of solution should we get? Corner solution or interior solution?
The corner solution.
Good. Yeah, because we've seen that very high inflation means corner solution. So infinity means, so it means if I anticipate that my money is worth 0 tomorrow, then there's just no reason to keep anything. So I consume everything today. Okay, good. So I see that you understand very well. So let us continue. So you see again the quiz. Yeah, so this was the quote that I posted there about Tyler Cowen. Okay, yeah, so these are the quiz answers. You can look at them. So let's just solve analytically what we get. So the first order solution, so again, so we solve this with Lagrangian. So we maximize this Lagrangian with respect to Ct in time t, Ct t plus 1, and lambda. And this it's equal to consumption to intertemporal utility, U of Ctt plus beta U of Ctt plus 1 plus the budget constraint, lambda times omega, what I produce, minus Ctt, what I consume in period t, minus 1 plus pi t, Ctt plus 1. And you solve this like you would any consumer problem. Here, don't be scared with this inverted triangle. It's called nabla. And it's just a shorthand for a vector of first order condition of first derivative. So it means the vector of this, this, and this. And it has to be equal to a vector of 0, 0, 0. So that's just a short way of saying that we want to find the first order condition. So d lambda dct gives us, so I derive this with respect to Ct and get u prime of Ct plus lambda times minus minus 1. Yeah, so it's this. I would do these on the board if I had a board, but I'm not good enough with a tablet, so I just do that on the computer. And similarly, DL dCT t plus 1 is beta u prime CT t plus 1 plus lambda times minus 1 plus pi, so pi t, so that's the only difference here. And then if I derive with respect to lambda, the Lagrange multiplier, I get the constraint as always. And what I can do to solve this is, well, I can add lambda times minus 1 on each side of this equation, add lambda times minus 1 plus pi t on each side of this equation, and then divide one by the other. And if I do, I get this solution here, which is the earlier equation of intertemporal consumption. Does that ring a bell? Yes, no?
Not at all.
Okay. All right. So it's for Leonhard Euler, the famous German mathematician who is like the father of everything that's good in mathematics. Was, I think, the advisor of Gauss. Anyways, so his name is everywhere. So that's so this equation is named after him. So what this represents here is basically the substitution effect. So the fact that the relative price of consumption today and tomorrow is 1 plus pi t, or if I take the inverse of this ratio, it's 1 over 1 plus pi t, and this has to equal the relative marginal utility in period t and in period t plus 1. So if you go back to your macroeconomics, what we found was that the relative prices of two goods had to be equal to the marginal utility of consuming one or the other good. So it looks exactly the same. It's just that the marginal utility of consumption tomorrow is beta, my discount factor, times the marginal utility of consumption times the consumption tomorrow. And for today, it's U prime times CT, and this has to equal to the marginal price, and here it's the inflation. And so, for instance, well, let me start by an increase in inflation. So if inflation increases, then it means that I should, now I'm not saying that I will consume less today or more tomorrow. I'm saying everything in terms of relative consumption today and tomorrow. That's all I can say with this formula because I have both here. So what I'm saying is if pi t goes up, then this ratio has to go up. That's what it says. How do you make it go up? Well, this is, so U prime is a negative function of consumption because there is decreasing returns to consumption. So if I increase consumption tomorrow, then it decreases the marginal utility of consumption tomorrow, of course, because it means I have even more. So an extra unit gives me even less. So if I want to this ratio to go up, then I have to reduce consumption tomorrow and increase consumption today. So this is what it says here. So the marginal value of savings, here savings is keeping some money in the bank, or not in the bank, but in your mattress, because there is no bank, for consumption tomorrow. So it decreases because obviously your purchasing power decreases tomorrow. So then CT t plus 1 decreases relative to CT, which raises beta U prime CT t plus 1 relative to U prime CT. And then if beta increases, so beta is the value of the relative value of consumption tomorrow, which compared to today. If beta increases, then it means that, so this goes up, so this ratio has to go down, not up, because this doesn't change. So the reverse has to be true. So it means that tomorrow's consumption has more weight in the utility. So if I discount less the future, it means I care more about consuming tomorrow. So yeah, CT T+1 has to increase relative to CT, which will decrease U prime relative to U prime CT, which will keep this fraction the same. So it may seem confusing at first because you have plus minus everywhere, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, so one thing we're going to do is substitute these utility function for a real functional form, an analytical functional form. So it's going to be very simple. But still questions about this, or?
So this ratio is what we call a marginal weight of substitution.
Yeah, it's the. Say that again.
I think we used to call that a marginal weight of substitution, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I would call them relative utility or relative marginal utilities.
Okay.
Yeah. But so as long as you are, I'm not going to use this expression in the exam. So, but the thing is understand the concept. Yeah. Okay. So now we're almost done. Oh, sorry, let me just. All right. So as I said, let's just substitute U of C equal log of C. So you can see that log, of course, is this shape. So it means that it has decreasing returns. And if I do that, then the ratio becomes, so here I have U prime of CT becomes 1 over CT. So CT goes to the numerator, and U prime CT T+1 becomes 1 over CT plus 1. So it goes to the denominator. So I get, and then what I did is I divide, so I divided so I inverted on each side. So then I get this simple expression there. And you can convince yourself that everything we said here still holds for this expression there. And then, yeah, so then what we can do is actually find out what are everything. So what are the consumption in every period and the inflation in every period and everything. So we can basically solve the model. So we use the third first order condition, which was the budget constraint, omega minus CT minus 1 plus pi CT T plus 1 equals 0. And what we can do is, we can substitute 1, so CT and find CT plus 1, or CT plus 1 and find CT. And then when we do, we find these expression there. Let me ask you, so is inflation good or bad for consumers in this model?
It's bad at time T plus 1.
Yes, so, but I get to live in both periods, right? So my utility is this. So it's bad for consumption in period t+1, so it means that it's
But we can't really say anything about it.
why not?
Well, because first of all, you have consumers in year T and in year T+1. And to some extent, it will also depend on their utility functions.
Okay. So what you're saying is I have to care about both the generations.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. And actually, when you have overlapping generations, then you have sometimes I have ambiguous answers, and sometimes the market doesn't come up with the first best. So that's the good reflect. Now what I'm asking is for the generation who was born in period T, is inflation in period T good or bad? Just for them.
So I would say it's bad on the extent that it's a larger constraint on their choices and budget constraint.
Good answer. So if we just look at our graph, then it reduces their consumption possibilities. And actually what we can see is that it's quite obvious that it's bad, but because they're going to consume on the budget constraints. So if all the available consumption choices are worse than what was on the previous budget constraint, then we know it's bad for them. And actually, so that's it's not a very difficult question. It's just, so in period T, my consumption is not affected by inflation, so I don't care. But in period T+1, my consumption is reduced by inflation. So all in all, I'm worse off. I'm sad. Yeah, and so what does that mean exactly, that to me? How will that, if you had to tell me the story of what's going to happen?
Can you repeat your question?
How is that going to turn out bad? So why would I not be able to buy as much stuff as before?
Because if you have a big preference for the future, you won't be able to consume as much in T+1.
Yes, for the same...
for the same consumption in CT.
Yes, exactly. Or for the same, for the same savings. So what happens is prices have gone up. So I want to use the money I have kept to buy stuff, but no, prices have gone up. So the young generation is not ready to give me as much. Yeah, and then lastly, what we can do is use first of our budget constraint in period T. So which is PT CTT plus MT equal PT omega. And then we can just substitute CT here. And then it gives us the value of MT. So because I just substituted here. So I get this value here. So MT equals, so this is the amount of money in circulation as a function of prices and the amount that is being consumed by one generation. So this is a sort of what we're going to see, an equation of exchange, because it's a link between the money supply, the amount of real money or paper money or fiat money that's circulating in the economy, and prices, and how much goods there are to exchange. So obviously, if people didn't need to exchange goods, then we wouldn't have any price, because we couldn't have some exchange rate between how much M is exchanged for how many goods. But since we have exchange between generations, then this is the result. Yeah, and of course, so the highest money supply or the lowest price are going to be when beta equals 1 plus beta. So it's when people want to consume about the same in each period. Otherwise, if people wanted to consume so imagine that beta was 0. So it means that we're at corner solution because people don't care about the future. Then here we would have that, yeah, it's a weird solution. Prices would have to be infinite, actually, to convince them to exchange some goods. All right. Now let's just describe the equilibrium. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't understand if inflation rate don't rely to the consumption in period T. How it is possible to have a substitution and income effect if people just don't care of inflation in period T? So we see that inflation impacts the consumption in period T. However, in this equation, inflation don't play a role in consumption.
Okay, yeah. So what happened there is that there's no more inflation because it's hidden in PT. So here we have the choices that are as function of the relative price period T and T plus 1, but I could substitute, I could make a similar graph with PT and PT plus 1 here. And that would give me something similar, but in terms of prices. So yeah,
consumption in a period T depends on PT plus 1. Almost.
Yeah, it does. Can you rephrase your question?
But in this equation of CTT, I don't understand why there is not inflation rate, because we see that inflation rate impacts consumption in period T and in period T plus 1.
Yes, it's a great remark. I wanted to say it. So what we just said in the quiz is that the impact on inflation on consumption CTT was ambiguous because there is two effects going on. So substitution effect means that CTT should go up, but income effect means that CTT should go down. So that's for a general utility function. And what I do find here is that these two effects exactly cancel out. So they are exactly the same. And this is what you get with a Cobb-Douglas utility function. If you have a Cobb-Douglas utility function, this is the kind of thing that happens. So for instance, if you have two goods and the price of good 2 increases, what happens to consumption of consumption of good 1? It doesn't change. So all people do is consume less of good 2, but they spend exactly the same. It's like so that actually that's so because you see U of C equals log of C, in this context is exactly like if I had the Cobb-Douglas utility. I can just take the exponential of this, and I would get, Cobb-Douglas utility.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, it's totally. It just slipped my mind. I wanted to say it.
Sir?
Yes.
So it's just like we have two goods.
Yes, it's instead of good one and good two, you have consumption in the present, consumption in the future. And instead of P1, P2, P price of good one, price of good two, you have price level PT and price level PT plus one.
Okay.
Okay. Lastly, we describe our general equilibrium. So prices are taken as given by the consumers. The old give their money to the young. So the total demand for money from the young, which is LTMT. So MT is the amount of money they want, and it's times LT, the amount of people in the young generation. Then this has to equal the money supply borrowing from the old. So LT minus 1, MT minus 1. So the equilibrium is that the money demand and money supply have to cancel out. So we simply have that LT T minus 1, MT minus 1 equals to LT MT. And we can use that to find out what is the increase of prices over time, because it will give us everything basically. So what I can do is, so I can use this. What I can do is divide by MT minus 1. So I get, and so that's one thing. Second thing is I know what LT is in respect to LT minus 1, because it's LT minus 1 times the growth rate of population plus 1, so 1 plus n. And you see that, so this is going to cancel with this. And then what I can do is use this equation there, MT equals to PT omega beta over 1 plus beta. And I can simply do the same in period t minus 1. So MT minus 1 equals PT minus 1 omega beta over 1 plus beta. And so everything cancels basically. And I get this super simple expression that omega t minus 1 equals minus n over 1 plus n. And what I see is, since I assume that n is always the same, and is just a constant, then it means that inflation is also just a constant. So we can just write that it's equal to pi. And what do we see? Well, maybe I shouldn't have written that. So let me, that this is inaccurate. Don't read that here. So what is the, so what is inflation? Is there a positive or a negative inflation?
Negative.
Yes, so it depends on the growth rate of population. So yeah, but so here I just assume that it's positive, so the population grows, because that's always what we tend to assume. And in that case, so money loses its value over time, or actually no, sorry, gains the value over time. So can somebody give me the intuition behind this?
Sorry, I don't really understand the question.
The question is, why is there negative inflation if there is an increase in population? If there is positive population growth?
Because there are the same amount of money, and with a bigger and bigger population to share this amount?
Yes, and the thing is, so people always produce the same. So if you have more people producing goods, then you have more goods to be exchanged with the same quantity of money around. So this money has to be worth more just because of relative quantity. So that's exactly the right answer. Then I can use this to plug back in the utility of each person.
Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if so, we would have inflation because the prices increase if it's get more rare because more people want it.
Yeah, so inflation is the is the price of what? Of money or of goods?
I meant money, but
so PT is the how much money I exchange in exchange for some goods. So if the value of goods increase, then I have to pay more to obtain them.
okay.
So here yes. So
But if so, P would be positive if you have to pay more.
Yeah, but so the thing is, I don't have more money around.
But so you need to use more money, which is limited. So the price of it would increase as well. So I don't get the point at which P gets negative.
No, price never gets negative. But the increase in, so the price level decreases instead of increasing.
Well, okay, I think of it.
No, it's important. So what happens is I have the same amount of money M to exchange from period to the one period to the next, but the amount of goods that I have to trade increases over time. So it means that the relative amount of good is bigger and the relative amount of money is smaller because relative to the amount of good. So it's just a mathematical fact that the prices have to decrease. Think of it this way. In real life, why is there inflation? Because we think that, the government prints too much money, for instance, because the supply of money in the economy grows too fast compared to the supply of goods. Here, that's the opposite. The supply of goods increases, but the supply of money is flat.
Yes, okay.
Right.
Better.
So yeah, I can think of it in your head. Yeah, so let me now substitute CT and CT plus one in the CTT plus one in the utilities. So I get this expression there, and I confirm what I said, that people don't like inflation because they have less purchasing power in the future. So now question, is money neutral? That's a trick question. Okay, I'm going to fill my bottle. Think about it. So is money neutral?
No, because it creates deflation.
Good, but also yes, in some other sense.
But deflation impacts how the people behave.
It's absolutely true, but still, we can also say that money is neutral. Can you think in what way?
It is neutral in the fact that there is always the same amount of money.
Yes. Is there some other suggestion?
Or because it doesn't have a value, it's just used to pay goods?
Yes, so that's a good observation. Any other suggestion?
The idea, I think it's a bit what she said. We are only exchanging goods over time. And so money is a mean of exchange, not a good in itself. And so that's why, on a certain point of view, it is neutral.
But you said it's not, right?
Well, we can see it with different ways.
There's a precise reason why it is. Think of the goods, good one, good two. So the prices, they are not neutral because we care about the relative price of good one and good two to make our decision. But money can also be neutral for some other reason.
Because there is no financial market.
Oh,
but
yeah,
that's
but
the same idea in a sense.
Oh, there could be. All right, I'll tell you the answer. So money, of course, influences people's behavior, but what matters is not the exact quantity of money. So the third answer that was given was very good. So the first generation who invented money. So did they decide to produce? Imagine it's Bitcoin. They did. So the guy Satoshi Nakamoto who invented Bitcoin, he said, "Oh, there are going to be 8,000 Bitcoin." So did he? Would that have changed anything if he said it's not 8,000, it's 80,000 or 8 million? No, it's just zeros in the price of Bitcoin. So in the same way here, the value of the PT and PT minus 1 or PT plus 1 doesn't really matter in the sense that I could multiply them by 1,000 and people wouldn't change their choice. So in that sense, it's absolutely neutral. It's just a means of exchange. That's just some trinket that we use to exchange stuff. But what matters though is, of course, it's change over time. So the fact that it doesn't increase or decrease over time, this is very important. So that it's not super obvious to see it right away. And then finally, what we can do here is substitute inflation there by its value minus n over 1 plus n. And if I do that, I find this. So do people like having a society with a lot of kids or not? So do you prefer to live in Japan or to live in France, for instance?
I don't really get your question.
Well, my question is it better for one generation to have many children or few children? Assuming that they don't cost anything, here is just a spontaneous creation.
To have many children for have less value of inflation.
Yes, exactly. So as we said, if we have more people in the future generation, then it means that prices go down. So the purchasing power of money that was kept by the old generation is better. There's more people producing goods and people who are looking for some old person to exchange some of their money for the goods that they produce. So it's good to live in a society that increases a lot because it allows you to consume more in old age. So it's bad to live in Japan because you have a very little productive part of society compared to a very old, not productive old generation that depends on them to live. So it means that even though, imagine you're you're the baby boomer generation, and everybody saved and they were very responsible. Well, if they don't have kids, then who cares if you have a bank account with $10 million or euros in it? You can't spend them on anything because nobody's producing anything. So you really see how, in a sense, children are, and especially educated and productive children. So even here, Omega doesn't change, but you could imagine that it depends on education, for instance. Then it's very good to invest in them, to have them. So if we were back in the days, if I was a farmer, then I would say, oh, let's have 10 kids so then that they can produce on my farm and feed me when I'm old. Well, now we don't have that anymore, and we depend on everybody's children. But we still depend on the fact that some people have children, otherwise we just starve when we're old. Because as we said, we can't eat money. We need somebody to produce something. Or robots.
Is it the idea that more goods are produced, more money have great value?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
If more young people produce stuff, then lots of goods in circulation and lots of young people looking for old people who have money to exchange the money for their goods. So the value of the money accumulated by the old generation increases. And now we're going to see a very concrete example of this, the retirement saving gap. So that's the gap between how much retirement was promised to working generation compared to how much the current generation is going to be able to put in their retirement account, so that the contribution of the young generation pays for the savings of the old generation. And as you can see, it's pretty bad. France is not there, but it would be a bad situation too. So everywhere, it's going up and up and up. So here, for instance, yes, yeah, the US is here, the UK is here. So this means that over time, the pension funds have a harder and harder time compensating their current old people with the contribution of the young generation. And we've had this debate in France for many years, so it's not new. So what should we do about it? So I'm not here. You put your policy hat and you tell me what's your idea to save to fix this problem.
I don't really understand the problem.
The problem is, so in France, it's a government pension system mostly. So the government doesn't have enough money to pay for the pension of, say, old SNCF workers who have a very generous pensions with the contribution of the current generation. So that's why every few years they try to reform it, but it's very hard because the old people, or the train drivers, they don't want to change what they receive when they retire.
But why? What there isn't enough money to pay for the retirement of old people right now if there are lots of young people working?
Yeah, so that's the future, right? So 2015 is past, but 2050, that's on the current track, so it's going to be way, way worse. Well, that's because lots of people want to retire, and when they did contribute to their fund, they didn't have to contribute a lot, and they were not expected to live long. And now you don't have enough working people to pay enough pensions to pay them.
Oh, okay. But so governments should force young people, to save more in order to have enough money in the future to pay for their retirement.
Yeah, that's a perfectly good solution. So, but if you want to get elected and you tell people, "Oh, I'm going to solve your problem by making you pay more," it's not super popular. Any other suggestion?
You could pay people to have more children.
Actually, in France, we do that. It's super generous. And still, French people, after 2 or maybe 3, they're kind of, they say they have enough, but it's a good suggestion.
I was thinking if we had a capital retirement system, wouldn't it be a sort of global issue and not a national issue?
Yeah, but it's still an issue, right? So you see, this is the aggregate of the whole world. The whole world is going to be too old, and so have this this gap.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's my 2 cents on it. So I'm not saying what we should do, but I'm saying what we will have to do. Either we increase the contribution of the current generation. So that was what was suggested. So pay more. Either we agree that when we're old, we're poor. So we say, oh yeah, you contributed all your life, but we cut your pension because there's just not enough money. Or we retire older. We say you don't retire at 60 or 65, or you retire older, so you work longer for smaller benefits. Or final solution, we live a shorter amount of time once we retire. That's the problem. The problem is if somebody retires at 60 but lives until 90, so you have to pay them for 30 years. That's a huge amount of time not being productive, and that's obviously a very big weight on society. So one of these things is going to have to happen. I'm not saying what, but that's a fact. And that's a difficult debate that every society has, and because of the demographic transition. when there's a lot of young people and few old people, you don't have to have that debate. But now, yes, it's going to have to happen. Otherwise, it's a Ponzi scheme, and at some point, you just don't have enough money.
So basically, we will need to choose between present and future.
Yeah, exactly. But it's difficult, and in France, it's very often mixed with the debate over redistribution. So rich people, they don't want to contribute to the public system, and poor people, they want to, and even somebody from the Parti Socialiste will say, "Oh yeah, but it should be the contribution should be paid more by rich people." Maybe it's good to redistribute, but the best way to not solve anything and to be mad at each other is to mix up issues. So retirement is one thing. So it's dealing with the fact that we're not productive in old age, and redistribution is another. And a very good way would be to kind of find a way to disentangle the two debates. So we can say, okay, we can make progress on redistribution, and then tomorrow we can discuss about overtime. But if we mix together the two, then it's just it's difficult to make progress, and that's why things are not changing. Actually, my thesis advisor in my master's thesis, he was saying France is going to be bankrupt just because of train drivers. The SNCF is just so generous. So he said, you have to pay them. You have to agree, okay, we're going to give you a big lump sum of money now, but agree to change the SNCF retirement plan because they're too generous. And it's not, because, train driver is not some exceptional job that should be so different from all the other jobs that people can have. So it's so if your parents are train driver, you're not going to agree with me, but that's my 2 cents in it. All right. Lastly, corner solution. Rather, is it possible to have inflation, hyperinflation in this model? Hyperinflation would be for one generation to say, "Oh, I don't want to buy any more money, and I want to." So last generation was at the interior solution, and then inflation goes up. And then the current generation is at the corner solution. So is that possible? Well, not in this model. Why? Just because there's perfect anticipation. And people don't want to get screwed over. So they don't want to lose stuff. So it means that here we assume that there's perfect foresight. So it means that imagine that the value of money is 0 tomorrow. So it means that there would be hyperinflation from period T to T plus 1. Then what would the generation at period T do? They would say, oh, so money is worth nothing tomorrow. Well, why should I want to exchange any good for it if it has no value? So I rather consume everything today and die tomorrow, die young. So then the value of money drops today as well. And it means that if money has 0 value in one period, then it needs to have 0 value in all periods. So in this model, you have only 2 possible solutions. So either a corner solution all the time or interior solution all the time. But it's not something that's super insightful. It's just how this model works with perfect foresight. So that's what I'm saying here. So CT minus 1 would be 0 as well. So in every period, CT T would be omega, CT plus 1, T plus 1 would be omega in every period, and CT, T plus 1 would be 0 in every period. So that's not super interesting as a solution, because obviously we have money around, but that's what would happen. Now so this is not in the model, but this is something I added to make it possible to have hyperinflation. So I don't expect you to, I'm not going to ask anything about this in the exam, but just if you want to ask yourself, could we have hyperinflation, yes or no? Then let's just add some uncertainty in the model. If you have uncertainty in the model, then you just have some risk that, so it makes hyperinflation possible, because money can have value at every period, but then at some period there could be something that goes on, and people think that tomorrow is going to their money is going to be worth nothing, so they should not exchange it. So I just introduced this probability theta there, and so you have to know something about intertemporal and so utility and utility under uncertainty. But that gives you something that's not too different. It's just you have some theta that appears everywhere. So but we shouldn't spend too long on that. So that's just my 2 cents to make the model a bit more realistic. But yeah, that's about it for this. What time is it? 3:23. So I suggest like 10-minute break, and then we can come back and continue on hyperinflation, unless there's a question.
So after the break, we do the following chapter.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so see you in 10 minutes. And we're back. So last chapter, we have 3 subsections in this chapter. So today we certainly won't have time for a Kagan model, but we'll see the first 2, money and prices in the long run, and hyperinflation episodes. Even I think maybe we are going to, so next, and then the next class after that, we're going to be able to finish the Kagan model and see all the episodes of hyperinflations. Okay. Oh, my mouse is not responding for some reason. Oh, okay, yes. Unplugged it. Sorry about this. Okay. So when we Google hyperinflation, or we check in Wikipedia, that's usually the picture we see. So the Bank of Zimbabwe, and accompanying is this famous quote from John Maynard Keynes. So he says, there is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and does it in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. So he's pretty concerned with inflation. I would say that having a pandemic is bad too. So yeah, there are many problems, but surely hyperinflation is a serious one. So
are you showing us anything?
Yes.
Because we see the slides with the quiz, but not.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I did share it. You're not seeing Zimbabwean dollar.
Oh, no, we do.
Okay. So for some reason, it didn't work the first time I did it. Yeah, so I just read you this quote there by John Maynard Keynes and show you this famous Zimbabwean dollar. What's crazy about Zimbabwe is that they kept it until the end. So they said, we're not going to change our currency. We're just going to add more zeros. So here they had a $100 trillion bill, which is not worth anything. But so that's what you do when you're stuck with hyperinflation. So yeah, so this test is going to be much more factual. So the first one was really about can we look at the value of money over time in a purely functional way, assuming that somebody invented it and that's it. Now we're going to see much more factually what happens when people keep or lose faith in money. So yeah, this discussion about the relative value of money has been going on for a long time. So here I'm going to show you one from somebody who lived here a long time ago. So Jean Bodin. So the problem is that Mr. Malestroit, I have no clue how you pronounce this. He was observing that, so back then, obviously, there was no paper money, so it was precious metals, so silver and gold. And then at some point, he saw that the value of silver was going down, so meaning that there was inflation in silver. And he said, "Oh, what's going on there? I have it's a mystery." And then this law professor, Jean Bodin, said, "Oh yeah, but no, it's not a mystery. What happens is the Spanish have established a nice colonial empire in Latin America, and they have this very productive mine in Potosi that helps them produce a lot of silver and bring it back to Europe. And then the Spanish say, 'Oh, we're rich now. We have so much money that we can spend it and buy everything we want. But there is this side effect that if you spend too much money in silver, if you flood the market with silver, at some point, the relative value of silver, compared to other things, is going down, because the amount of goods that people are able to produce is relatively the same, but the amount of money in circulation is keeps increasing. So that's one of the first documented, well, there was other episode, but one episode in which they rewrote about this problem. So it's and obviously back then people didn't have this all the notions we have today about how prices work and how they depend on the relative quantity of the relative supply of money compared to the relative need to exchange goods. All right, so now we first start with so prices in the long run. So this was happening over time, and we see that this is a phenomenon that that has been happening. Well, that's always the case. That so in the short run, inflation can be a function of many different things, but in the long run, it's something that we should really consider, because it goes at the heart of what money is. So these two authors, George McCandless and Warren Weber, they wrote this nice article, Some Money Facts. So what they wanted to do was simply to look at what's important for the value of money in the long run. So is it its supply? What affects price levels? Is it the supply of money, or is it GDP, or is it how money is circulating in the economy? Yeah, so it's basically reproducing this observation of Jean Bodin about silver, but in the present. So looking at the impact of money supply on prices. So they took a sample of 110 countries over 30 years. So you see that's a long term. And so they computed the long run geometric average of growth. Since growth is something that's multiplicative over time, that's why we use a geometric average. So just arithmetic average is, say, x plus y divided by 2, for instance, and geometric average would be x multiplied by y, and you take the square root of that. So that's the equivalent of average, but for multiplication. And here they take so standard measure of production, the gross domestic product adjusted for inflation. So obviously what we want is as close as possible to real GDP. So just count the number of goods that's being produced in all these countries. 3 commonly used the definition of money, M0, N1, and M2. Small quiz question. So are travelers checked included in M1 or not? I'm just kidding, I don't care. So the only thing you have to know is M0 is paper money. It's what's most liquid. It's what everybody in the world is going to accept. And then M1 and M2 starts adding stuff like current accounts and savings account and equity and all these other more indirect way of having value that are less easy to exchange over time. Yeah, but I'm never going to ask you, tell me what's inside M0, N1, and M2. You can look it up on Wikipedia. And then a standard measure of general price levels, so consumer prices. And they look at they make two homogeneous subsamples. So the full sample is 110 countries, but then they look at 21 OECD countries, and they also look at 14 Latin American countries. And so this is what they find. So they find this. So on the x-axis is money growth, so the growth of supply of money. So it's in the previous model we had a supply of money that was fixed, didn't change. Here it does change, and we see that for some countries it changed a lot over the time period. So 1960 to 1990, so 80% growth per year. And on the y-axis is the average growth in prices over the same period. And what do we observed? Well, we observed that it's essentially unity, one. If you want to fit a line through this, then it's 45 degrees. So countries that had a very big money growth also had a very high inflation. So it really looks like Jean Baudet's observation about silver is still the case. So if you slowly but surely increase the supply of money, then it's going to increase the price level.
But in this period of time, we also had a big growth level.
Yes, okay, that's perfect observation. It's exactly the point of their paper. The point of their paper is what matters most. So it does look like money supply is important, but obviously it's not the only thing. So if the amount of goods also change, then we should take that into account. Now, why we may already have some idea that it might not be that important is the scale here. So you don't have annual growth rates of 80%. You have a big, very good growth is like 10% in China, for instance, but you never have economies that grow 80% year over year for the whole period. So, but you did have countries with that average growth rate in money supply. So you can get a sense of scale here. So the scale is some countries printed and printed and printed tons of money during that period and saw at the same time a very high inflation. But it's so it's very important thing to see still is what about changes in the GDP growth. So that's what we can look at next. Yeah, okay, so this here is the yeah, maybe I could look at the third graph. Yeah, so that's what you were asking. Is it output growth and money growth? Money growth, oh, that's the same. Okay, yeah, okay, that's what you're asking. So the link between inflation and real output growth. Is that what you're asking? So you're asking, what you're saying is, you're saying, oh yes, but in some countries maybe they increase their money supply as response to the increase in the amounts of goods produced, so real GDP.
Yes,
okay,
that's my point.
Yeah, so that would be that graph, right? Money growth as a function of real output growth. And what we see is that we don't see anything, basically. Some countries had a huge increase in money supply, and some had very little increase in money supply. So this is the full, this is M2. Yeah, and this is the full sample, 110 countries, and we can't see anything. So it looks like maybe there's some link for some subset of countries. So that's what we're going to look at next. But the full sample, we see that in some countries they had very little growth over time, so a few percentage points, and still they chose to increase their money supply very, very much compared to other countries where they didn't. So that's for one sample. And then, yeah. So this is the some subsample. It's the OECD subsample, so OECD countries. And here we do see that it looks like countries that grew more decided to issue a bit more money so that people could exchange it. But it's a small, the thing is, so the money growth was kind of limited in the OECD subsample, and we kind of saw that, yes, in those countries, those countries were also countries that grew more, but it's faint relation. I wouldn't put a lot of faith on this holding up to it forever. But you're right that it's important. So we could take a very simple example. Imagine that we fuse together France and Germany. So the money supply would be the sum total of the money supply in France and Germany, and the GDP would be the sum total of production in France and Germany. So if we did that, yes, we would have doubling in the money supply and doubling in the GDP. So we should observe it. But it looks like over a long period, there just isn't a lot of variation in the growth of real GDP compared to the variation in the money growth. All right. And yeah, this is the link between inflation and real output growth. So does inflation prevent growth or helps growth? So I don't know, maybe, so governments really seem to think that if they stimulate the economy by having low interest rate and having banks loan to more people, so create money essentially. So it should be good for them to have low unemployment rate and win re-election, maybe in the short run, but in long terms, then this really reflects what we were saying, is that in the long term, it doesn't help for growth. Money seems to be neutral. Yeah, so that's it about their finding. So their finding is there's a one-to-one relationship between price levels and inflation, and there's kind of no relation between the real GDP and either of these things, either real GDP and GNP growth or real GDP growth and inflation. Okay, so this is the equation of exchange. Have you seen this equation before?
Yes, in first year.
So it really looks like the previous equation we had. In the previous equation, we had MT was equal to PT times omega beta 1 over beta. So this was the sort of equation of exchange of this model. It was a relation between the amount of money, the money supply, what we can use to do transactions, and the price level, and the amount of good that was needed to be transacted. So, and essentially V was beta over 1 over beta. So it's the fraction of goods being produced that need to be exchanged in the economy. And also, of course, there is how much people use their money. So if I was to like accumulate tons of euros and put that in my mattress and just use a small amount, then it essentially means that V is small. So M may be very big, but if I hide everything at home and don't use it, then it's like if the velocity of money is small. Yeah, so let me define terms. M is the money supply, Y is the real output, P is price level. So P times Y is the nominal output. So if it's our measure of GDP in nominal terms, in euros. And V is the velocity of money. So it measures how fast money is in circulation in the economy. But it's not something that you measure directly. it's just something that you use to make this equation balance. So it's not a theory of anything, it's just an identity, and V is something that you use to make these two sides balance, basically. And when M is very large compared to Py, so we say that that's because V is small, and when M is very small, then we say it's because V is higher. So it's just the remainder of the equation. Okay, and now what we are interested in is looking at that over time. So this was growth and inflation. So this is change over time. So we want to introduce, so we don't want to deal with this in multiplication terms. So we want to use them in products. So what we can do is take logs on both sides. So we get log of M plus log of V equals log of P plus log of Y. And then what we're going to look at is the change over time of the left-hand side as function of the change over time on the right-hand side. Well, it's not something is function of the other. It's just we look at the evolution of all the variables over time. So what we want to take is the derivative of each of these things. So since this is a identity, it's always true. So it means that if it's true today, it's true tomorrow, and the change from today to tomorrow, so the growth rate, is also true. So let's do that. So what we can do is differentiate the ln m dt, for instance, and what we find is that when we take the derivative of logs, so we have already talked about it. So d ln x dt is 1 over x times dx dt. So it's so what is this? Then it's just a growth rate. This is the change over time of x divided by x. So it's x dot over x. So I get that this is so it means that the growth rate of money is equal to the growth rate of velocity plus the growth rate of velocity is equal to the inflation growth rate of the prices plus real output growth. So y dot over y. So no uncertainty or uncertainty about this. All right, so let me ask you a question. So then what matters for this relation in the McCandless and Weber's results, so the result we just saw, what's important?
M and P?
Yes, good. So M sometimes go very, very high, close to 100%. P sometimes is very, very high, it's close to 100%. And it looks like, well, velocity we didn't think about. As we said, we don't measure it, but then y over y just doesn't change as much as m over m and p over p. So if it was a very responsible country that just issued the right amount, so there is, I think, Switzerland. So Switzerland, they had like for a very long time, they didn't have any inflation, or it's just, everything is so stable in that country. In 1,000 years, it's just going to be the same thing with people and going with their cars to the mountain and their banks, and nothing changes in Switzerland, and they have very little inflation. They're very responsible. So in that country, you would say that M changes and Y changes and P is very stable. But for average countries, it's not the case. It looks like M changes too much compared to Y, so that P has to adjust as a result. Sorry, yeah. So that's what I was saying. So there's a one-to-one relation between m dot over m and p dot over p, and essentially no relation between y over y and the two others. Again, that's a long run. So in the short run, many things can happen. So you would have to look at, I don't know, New Keynesian models to look at that with output, productivity shocks and money shocks and all these things. So that's something we see more later on. I would say maybe in master's degree if you continue. This is just an introduction to money. All right. So, and what are the paroxysmal episodes of changes in M and P? So that's hyperinflation. That's what we're going to see. Yeah. So how much time do we have? Yeah. So yeah, we still have an hour. So yeah, that's good. We have time. So some notable hyperinflation episodes. France. So yeah, since we're in France, let's continue with our French example. So this was just after the French Revolution. So political instability is good for inflation, for hyperinflation, because it means that you don't have a central authority that controls the money supply and people do whatever they like. So one example of that was the National Assembly that needed money to finance all the wars with the neighbors. So what they said is, okay, we're going to seize church property. So seize all these golden objects and all these valuable items in churches. And then, so tell people that we emit some currency that we call assignat. And they can always come back to us and exchange their assignat for church property. So it worked for a while, but until the English realized that it was very easy to counterfeit assignat, and they started producing a lot of assignat of their own. And at some point, there were too many assignats for the amount of goods in circulation. So people started realizing that maybe assignats weren't as valuable as they thought. And the peak inflation month was 304%. So you're going to see that for hyperinflation now, we don't talk about years like this. We talk about months, because things when things start to go bad in hyperinflation episodes, then it's super quick. One of the most famous episodes was Weimar Republic. We're going to talk about it much more. So 1922, 1923, following World War I, and they had to print money essentially to pay a lot of things, to pay debtors, to pay foreign governments. So we're going to talk about this in more detail. China, 37 to 49, again, that's political instability. So the nationalist government needed to inject money, basically print money to finance their war against the communists. And so the prices started to go up and up and up too. Now let me show. So maybe somebody knows, but I don't think so. So what is the record? What is the worst hyperinflation the world has ever seen? Do you know?
I think it's the one in Germany.
Yeah, it's a bad one, but yeah, there were worse episodes. Zimbabwe is a very bad one, for sure. No idea. So it's not one that is very well known, but yeah. So it's Hungary. in 1945-46, just after the war. So what happened? First of all, World War II destroyed 90% of the manufacturing capacity of the country. So you have here, Y goes down by 90%. So something has to adjust. So either it's M or it's V or it's P, but something must make up for the change in Y. But what did the government say? Well, they said, oh, it's destroyed. So what we have is to inject more money into the economy to prime up to spending and to make people be optimistic about the future. So low interest rates so that to jumpstart the economy through monetary expansion. So what did people do? Did they react by being overly optimistic? No. There was already 10 times more money in circulation than the amount of that than what was justified by the size of the economy and the denomination on these bills. And the government injects even more money. So it didn't take long for people to realize that their currency was not worth anything. And the peak inflation month, so that's month, in 1 month, prices increased by, so this is in scientific notation, 1.3 times 10 to the 16 percent in 1 month. So that's how bad things were. So it means essentially that prices doubled every 15 hours. So imagine you owe some money to your landlord for your apartment, and you say, "Oh yeah, let me pay you back in 2 days." Then you don't have anything back to pay because the debt is in nominal terms. If your rent is I don't know 600 euros, then you just wait for a while, and then this 600 euros in real term is worth nothing. So you see why somebody like Keynes would say that you can't do anything. You can't do any transactions. You can't write down a contract. You just obsess over money all the times. It's just a horrible state of affair. And so by 1946, so just 1 year later, so $1 US was worth 4.6 octillion pengos. That's 4.6 times 10 to the 29 pengos. So that's sometimes we say numbers are astronomical. Well, in economy, we even beat some of them. So because that's more than the atom in 1 gram of something. That's more than the stars in the galaxy. That's just a crazy, crazy number. That's how much people lost faith in their money real quick. Yeah, so that was Hungary, their worst episode. Bolivia in 1984 and 85. So I don't remember exactly the details. Brazil was so they wanted to print money to finance the construction of their new capital, Brasilia. We're going to talk more about this one. Yugoslavia, 1992, 1994. So have somebody realized that I've changed my background?
Not at all.
Yeah. Oh, I'm disappointed. I thought you obsessed over my background. So I put this. Yeah, I wanted to have it in my office, but we can't hang anything in the office, so I kept it here. So this was so when I visited the country, and I found somebody who sold these bills as a token of this episode. So this is what happened. So in real quick, so in the 2 years, they went from bills of 5,000 to 10,000. Oh, maybe you can't see because it's too far. So yeah, 50,000, 500,000. The worst is like, I don't know what this number is. It's down there. It's like this is 1 million, 1 billion, so 500 billion. So when things start going bad, things go bad very quickly. It's not worth anything, so it cost me like €5 to buy them, but the frame was much more expensive. Yeah, so do you know what happened in Yugoslavia?
Where?
In Yugoslavia, why they had such a bad episode?
A war?
Yes, exactly. So there was the genocide, and then the OTAN coalition to attack the country. So the government needed to finance the war real quick. And by the way, if you go there and you ask people about it, they say, "Oh yeah, you attacked us, you mean person," and so they have a very different perspective on events. They don't talk about genocide or anything. So yeah, but yeah, in economics term, that was the very bad episode for them. Zimbabwe, 2007, 2009. Maybe we have time to talk about it. And present term, Venezuela, still not over. Sorry, so there's pandemic and stuff, so we have other things to talk about. But their crisis is not going away. They still have now they're in real trouble, and maybe we have time to talk about it later on. Okay, so let's talk about the most famous of these episodes, the Weimar. Oh, question, yeah?
Yes, I was just thinking, when we have inflation in those countries, for how long do people really use the national currency? Because I'm thinking it will be more rational and people will switch quite fast to other currencies to exchange.
Yes, actually. So by the way, let me go back to the previous class when I was talking about the textbooks. So what I said is, so imagine the professor announces that he's going to change the textbook. So instantly people say, "Oh, we stopped using it," because it's rational to do that. So you're right. Things happen very quickly. Well, not instantly, because many people have to realize that something bad is happening. But when they do, yes, they. So, for instance, my rent, it's written in euros. So if the euro is not worth anything, so then my landlord has to come to see me and run and say, "Oh, I changed my rent, now it's 10 times more." So it's complicated to adjust prices. By the way, that's something you're going to see in New Keynesian models, like sticky prices. The fact that each period some percentage of people change their price, while some other don't change their price. But so you're right that people do change, and people. So it depends what type of hyperinflation. So in Hungary, it's instantly. So they instantly said, "Oh, we don't trust the currency," so the government instantly introduced higher and higher denomination, but very quickly it was out of hand. Yeah. But in other episodes, like Brazil, it went on for a very long period. So in that case, it's not that people think that money is going to be worth zero, but they know that it's just you have some very, very big inflation month after month after month after month, and you have to care about this. You have to change prices all the time. You have to worry about the interest that you get. So if the bank says, "I give you 10% interest, but there's 30% inflation rate," then I don't want to deal with that bank. I'm just going to buy gold and keep gold instead of keeping this money, because I'm going to lose money in real terms if my nominal interest rate is too low. All right, but yeah, so it depends from episode to episode.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, this is one of the most famous example, but we use these past examples, but hyperinflation is not going away. We have many countries, like 200 countries, and there's bound to be one or two that are in trouble almost every year. But yeah, so these are the details. So when World War I break, Germany had a very good plan. They said, let's suspend convertibility. So that's the first step. Is you see, we're not going to accept people converting their currency to gold, for instance, because otherwise we cannot issue as much money supply as we want. So you have to do that. And then hope you can trick people into still thinking that the money has the same value, but you can buy many things that you need for, say, the army to invade Europe. And so in France, when they fought the war, World War I, they used income tax, so they has the French people to pay higher taxes. But in Germany, what they thought was, okay, let's finance the war by borrowing. Then for sure we're going to invade France, we're going to invade our neighbors, and then we can use the spoil of war. So like the French Revolution did, they used what they found in churches to back up their currency. So in Germany, they said, oh, we're going to use that to pay back our loans and be rich. So it's a foolproof plan. There's just one thing, that it's asterisk, you have to win the war. And the problem is Germany didn't win the war. So after the war, they had lots of debt, lots of marks in circulation. Plus, then the other European countries, they were very mad at them. And they said, oh, you don't not only have to pay back the loans that you took to finance the war, but you also have to pay a large reparation, so 132 billion gold marks. But that was not such a great idea, and eventually just 20 gold marks were 20 billion were paid back. And one person who didn't think that was a good idea was John Maynard Keynes. So he was at the peace conference. He was representative of the British Treasury, but he quickly resigned in protest when he saw that France and the other allies were asking such reparation. He said, so I agree that you're mad at Germany for fighting this war, but still it's a very bad economic idea and a bad, even he said, moral thing to do, because it's going to traumatize, in a sense, German people. It's going to damage Germany's ability to pay back. And it's going to limit the country's ability to buy exports from other countries. So if you can't trade, because you owe money to everybody, and they never agree to let you exchange anything for you, it's just buy. Then it's you're stuck and you cannot grow. So you should actually, what the people should have done maybe is to let Germany not pay anything for a while, to let Germany grow back, and then they would have had some capability to pay back their loan. But no, they wanted their money right away. And yeah, Keynes was right in seeing that this wouldn't go well. So what they did, so obviously the allies were not fooled. Well, they were not called ally. It was the la Grande Entente et la Grande Alliance or something. I don't remember exactly if somebody knows their history, but anyway, so the winners of the war, they didn't want Germany to pay them in papier mark, so that was the the currency that was not tied with anything, because they knew that it was not worth anything. Germany had paid much too much, so they wanted to be paid back in their own currency, or in gold, or in other things. So to be paid back in their foreign currency. So Germany would have essentially to buy this currency with goods, so export. So what they needed to do basically what they tried to do is mass print banknotes to exchange internally to buy back all the foreign currency that was in Germany right now. So they could start to pay back the reparation, but obviously they couldn't. These banknotes that they printed, they couldn't back them by anything, because they didn't have reserve in gold, or they needed to use everything to pay back. So at some point, they said, "Oh, we are back on our payments. Sorry." So France and Germany and Belgium said, "No problem. We just invade you." So they occupied the Ruhr to ensure that they would pay back a reparation in gold. And they used the coal that was produced in the Ruhr region and other industrial zones in Germany to pay them back. So the workers in the Ruhr went on a general strike because they didn't want to work for the enemy. And the German government said, okay, it's a good thing, they're passively resisting, so we're going to help them with their strike by printing more money to finance them. So yeah, lots of things went bad, and eventually, so you just can't go on forever. It just can't go on forever. And in 1923, so the $1 American was worth 1 million billion, so 4,210 German marks. So yeah, their paper marks were not worth anything. So this is the value of the gold mark with respect to paper marks. So gold mark is backed up by gold, so it has a stable value. It's the gold standard, and you compare that to this paper mark that was just printed to get back gold marks to use to pay foreign countries. And you see it can go, the remark, oh, is it going to go fast? Yes. Once it starts, it's spike extremely fast. And if you don't do anything, so it really collapses. So yeah, we have these images of people who, here they were playing with stacks of inflated currency in 1922. And this was their domination. So 100 trillion mark note, 10 to the 14th. So yeah, it's pretty bad. So somebody has comment. So what went wrong exactly? When did things? What made this hyperinflation possible in the first place? What's different in this situation compared to the situation, say, in the Middle Ages or before?
France and the other countries should have received goods instead of money as a payment for the debt.
Yes, that's actually what they did receive. So they didn't want to receive paper money because they knew that Germany can just say, oh, we print you a 1 gazillion paper bill. Here it is. We don't have any debt. So no, they cannot do that. France and the other countries, they asked to be paid back in precious metals or in coal or in production.
But they invaded the region in Germany, which was the most productive region, I think, in the country. Well, they obviously German people couldn't produce anymore to pay them back.
Yes, I totally agree. That was a very stupid thing to do. Well, it's like, so if we think about the Solow model, then we have output Y and we have capital K. So what friends said, they said, oh, we know that your output Y is never going to be large enough, so let's take your K instead. But then what happens, and of course, if I seize your capital K, then you can produce even less the next period. So, so what I'm asking is, what makes hyperinflation possible? What is the source of this distrust?
The use of banknote. So compare it to the Middle Age when people used silver or gold that have an intrinsic value.
Perfect, exactly. So in the previous section, in the previous class, we said, oh, money is purely a fiction that's invented by one generation to allow exchange from generation to the next. So that's in the real world, we know what actually occurred. It's not like the first humans invented money and then they always lend the same money to the next. It's quite the opposite. It started as a very factual thing. I'm sorry. So if you think about it, so when anthropologists talk, they say, oh yeah, before there was the barter economy, and then, so barter, if you don't know, it's a truck. But what's actually fun about truck, about barter economy, is that no anthropologist ever observed a society with barter. And they think that it never exists. So it can exist only when you say you meet some, so for instance, the Europeans meet the American Indians. So they don't have common currency, so then they have to use barter. They exchange knives for furs or pelts or other things. But very, very quickly, if you establish a trade relation with some other person or within a group, then barter goes away. Why is that the case? Well, it's just inconvenient. So if you are in the barter economy, say I'm a fisherman and there's somebody else who's a school teacher, then I can tell him, okay, I exchange to you 2 fishes for 1 day of class of my kids, for instance. It can work sometimes, but maybe that person doesn't like fish. And maybe someday I catch 10 fishes and someday I don't catch fishes at all. So am I going to like pay 5 fishes in 1 day? That person says, yeah, but maybe I'm not hungry and I have to exchange it, but the fish is going to lose value. So what do you need? So what happens very quickly is bad objects for transaction just disappear from the market. People don't want to use days of schooling as exchange means of exchange or fishes as means of exchange. What they use is something that's practical. So it needs to have certain characteristics. It needs to have a value that has value for everybody. It needs to be easy to carry around. And it needs to not lose its value over time. So what is it? Well, it's precious stones and precious metals. Very quickly, I'm not going to trade in fish. I'm going to exchange the fish 1 day when I need it in exchange for precious metal, and then go to the school teacher and exchange his precious metal for schooling. So in a way, money is a barter that can occur at different times. It doesn't need to occur right away when I catch a fish and you give school for my kids. And it can occur, it doesn't need to occur between the 2 people who did produce the thing. So I can go to one person, exchange this gold for this first service, and then use that gold later on. And that third person is going to say, oh, I accept your goal. It's a sort of token of the fact that you did produce some service for the first person. So you don't need to produce service for me. It's enough that you give me gold. It's a token of the fact that you did produce a service for the other person. And we trust it because we trust that it keeps its value over time. And because I can always find somebody who's going to find it useful to use gold in jewelry, for instance. And nowadays, gold still has many applications. So in electronics, for instance, and as an insulator in high-tech cars, or yeah, in many instances. So that was the invention of money. Now, what was the next step? So in the Middle Ages, people used money, but what did, or maybe even before that, in the Roman times, what could the central bank do, or not the central bank, but the central government or the king do to make it standardized, and why? Can somebody think of it? So what's wrong with just people going around and exchanging some quantity of precious metal?
It's not recognized by the state. You cannot pay your tax with it. Maybe that's your point.
Yeah. Well, yes. So the king could accept a certain amount. But what I'm saying is the state can intervene to make transaction better. And there is a reason for it. So why did the states start to put their heads on coins? And say this is 5. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm thinking about debt monetization, and so the fact that you could sort of have an income from money creation.
Okay, it can be your job to yeah, but you're a miner if you extract precious metals, no? So what does that accomplish? To have some sense. So if you're in England, and to say this is 5 pounds or 10 pounds. So obviously the name 5 pounds or 10 pounds, it's not, or in French we have some denomination that's une livre, or and in Spanish they say el peso. So in Mexico, for instance, you pay in peso. So peso is weight, c'est le poids. So why would you do that?
Because the cost of creating one coin is lower than the value of the coin itself.
Yes, but so you're okay. You're thinking about the sort of creating the currency. So maybe I'm not being clear enough. If there's somebody who has a suggestion, go ahead. If not, I'm going to just say it.
Because money participates at the sovereignty of a nation. It's an image. It's a.
Okay, so it says everybody here has some allegiance to that king, so they use this as currency. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to say. So the reason why people started stamping money and say this is 5 pounds or 10 pounds, so getting involved, and why the king was the only person who wanted to issue money. It's because of following reason. When you exchange goods for money, then you want to be sure it's real money. So if you want gold, and the person says, oh, it's 5 pounds of gold, then you want 5 pounds of gold. So one way to make sure that you're not being fooled is you bring your own set of weights to make sure that it's really weighed 5 pounds. But still, somebody could mix the gold with something else to make it so something that people did was mix it with silver, so it's much less expensive than pure gold. And then they can trick people, so they can use some gold and then mix it with silver and then have more money with that. So the reason why government started to getting involved was to make sure that there's no counterfeiting. So there's only one person who says this is 5 pounds, and once there's the face of the king there, then people can trust for sure that it's always a question of trust.
But so it's a matter of trust. It could be another organization doing the same thing.
Yes, so that's why it was outlawed. Or for sure, stamping your own money or issuing your money is a privilege that the Lord has or the king has. And for sure, if he knows that somebody is trying to issue their own currency, then yeah, it's bad news for this person. So yeah, there's prestige going on for sure, but it's basically because if I decide to create a Bitcoin, and people are I can issue myself 1,000 Bitcoin, and if people start using Bitcoin, then I became rich without producing anything. So yeah, to make sure that people trust, they have to. So going back to all the episodes of political instability that led to hyperinflation. So it led to hyperinflation because people didn't trust that there was a single entity that printed a stable amount of money in circulation. Now, next step was paper money. So precious metals and coins is good, but still it's not that easy to carry. It's heavy. If you've tried carrying a big bag of coins, it's a hassle to carry with you. So then banks have said, okay, if you have your coins and you're scared that people are going to take them if you go on a trip, for instance, then what we can do is we can keep them for you. So you give us your coins and we give you paper money. And then you can start exchanging that. But then, of course, and you can print whatever number is on it, right? And that's what the central banks or the king started doing. So they said, okay, if you come back to me with that paper money, then I agree that I'm going to give you this quantity of gold in exchange for it. Yes, so one of the first time this happened was Kublai Khan in China. So he said, yeah, because back in China, back then was the Yuan dynasty, they use irons as coin, and iron is especially heavy. So he decided to do that. But then when they overthrew his dynasty, so they went back to using the... And by the way, I just realized that, so Yuan was the name of this dynasty of Kublai Khan that issued this currency, but it's also the name of the currency right now in China, the Chinese currency. So I thought maybe there's a link between the two, I don't know. Yeah, so still, there was some episodes in the history, but people always went back to gold standard most of the time. So do you know when we really stepped from gold standard to pure floating exchange rates, where money had its own value? Yeah.
I think it was in the 80s.
In the 70s, in 1971 or something like this.
Yeah, exactly. So after World War II, the Americans had a lot of money to, well, so they wanted to rebuild Europe, and they said, okay, we're going to give you loans, and don't worry, all the loans that we give you, so they are denominated in American currency, but it's always backed by reserves. We have perfectly enough gold to pay back any American dollar that's circulating in Europe. So obviously in Europe needed these resources to get back from the war and regrow itself. But at some point, so someone like Charles de Gaulle, for instance, less faith, and said, "Oh, I think U.S. you're overdoing it. So you're issuing your money and you're saying, yeah, trust us. We have as much gold as you like, and you use your money to buy anything. But we don't trust that you have this amount of reserve." So then the gold, so he did in 1965, so a bit before the 70s, he used a French Navy vessel and put like worth $150 million of on the ship and said, okay, I'm sending this ship back. I want my gold. And the U.S. government said, "Oh, well, yes, sure, you can have your gold." So they put their gold on the ship, and it went back to France. And they said, "Okay, we do that again," and it went up until 1971. But in 71, then France dried up all the gold from the U.S., or I don't know, but the U.S. said, "Okay, enough. You got us. We printed too much money. We don't have enough to pay back. We are out of gold." So it's the end of convertibility. So that's was Nixon. Yeah. So that was the last step. And then you have floating currency, and then you basically have to trust that the value of the currencies is maintained over time, but you cannot know for sure. So yeah, that was what went wrong in Germany, or all the hyperinflation episodes. It's the first step is when governments say, okay, we stop converting currency to the other goods. And so the same, let me just check time. Okay, so the same reason why currency stopped having value was that it wasn't backed by anything. So that's how in Germany they succeeded in making it worth something again, is by saying, okay, we're going to change the currency and back it up with something. So that was the end of hyperinflation. So they introduced the Rentenmark, and what they did, they said, okay, the Rentenmark is back, is now by law again, we see that our currency is backed by something real. And now they didn't have a lot of gold available, so they said, okay, we're going to back it up with land that's used for agriculture and business. So if you don't trust in the Rentenmark, you can come back to us, and by law we have to give you this land to use for agriculture or business. And that was enough. German people said, okay, we trust the law. If you say that's the law, then we agreed that to use the Rentenmark for our transactions, and the speculation stopped right away. And so the exchange rate was 1 Rentenmark for 1 trillion paper mark back then. So you see that the paper mark had a very, very low value. And they chose this exchange rate with the US. So 4.2 Rentenmark was worth $1 US. Because that was the same exchange rate for the mark before World War I. And that was called the miracle of the Rentenmark. And then, so that was 1923. Then in the 1924, they reintroduced some other currencies that was backed by precious metal and resources. So that was the Reichsmark. That was backed by coal, iron, and gold. So that's a bit funny, you know. It's oh, if you need if you want to exchange your currency for a call, you can come to the central bank, and the central bank pays you a call. So I don't know if it's real call, if it's call production or something, but yeah. So yeah, so it was stable as well. Yeah, so let me skip over Zimbabwe. That's interesting in its own right, but you can read about it. Yeah, so that's hyperinflation. So you see that's month-to-month hyperinflation in April, July, October, January. So things were bad. So there was a 100% inflation rate during month to month to month to month, and then in 1 month, 10 to the 11% inflation rate. Yeah, so yeah, 79.6 trillion%. So that's not that good. Obviously, it's very difficult to estimate these things. So these authors, they do their best to estimate it. All right. So last thing before we go. Yeah, let me give me 5 minutes for this one. Because you don't have class after. So Brazil is a very fun case. So as I said, they wanted to build Brasilia, but they lacked funding at some point, so they started printing too much money. But inflation didn't pick up immediately; it picked up over time. So as you can see, the monthly inflation in percentage was 20%. So it's not 100 or 1,000%, but still it was quite high, and for a while. So this is the 80s, but it started like the money printing started in the 50s, and it just people realized over time that there was a bit too much money for the amount of goods to be exchanged. So they said, okay, let me raise my prices a bit, and then they rose prices. So it picked up really in the 80s, and you see that. So here it's a 10% increase, and then they had multiple plans to fight it. And the worst month was 82% in 1990. So many fruitless efforts to fight hyperinflation. So one was a price freeze. So you tell people, no, you're forbidden by law to sell more expensive the goods to a more expensive price. So people said, oh, let's just hide the merchandise under the counter and wait for the freeze to go away. And that's what they did. So it didn't work. Then there was the color plan, in which they replaced the existing currency. What they wanted to, so they replaced the existing currency, and they tried to stop printing money. Also, what they had to do was freeze private assets for 18 months. So you cannot exchange, you cannot withdraw money from a bank. So why they did that? They did that because there was some loans that were denominated in they had extremely high nominal interest rates. Why? Well, again, because if I'm a bank and I want to convince people to put money in my bank, then I have to give them something. So if they know that the value of their money decreases very quickly, then they won't agree unless I give them some very, very high nominal interest rate to make up for it. So the nominal interest rate was 2,000% in some cases. They put high tax on financial transactions for other transactions after the freeze. They indexed taxes because they had to finance the government in some other ways, and since inflation is very high, then they had to index the value of taxes that they collected. But people didn't like it too much, so the president was impeached. So yeah, that's what happens when you freeze people's money. Then they're not happy with you. So the total amount of accumulated inflation rate between 85 and 1994 was very high. So yeah, this is in billions, about 184 billion %. Yeah, very high. So what was the solution? So I told you before that the problem is always the fact that at some point money starts floating and people start losing the trust that they can exchange back this currency for something valuable. And we saw that in say in the case of the Weimar Republic, what they did was say, okay, now we introduce back convertibility with other things, so with land, and you can trust that now this money is not going to lose its value, it's going to stay to keep its value. So we could think that the only way to get out of this was to introduce some currency that had was backed by some real value. Unfortunately, the thing is, compared to hyperinflation episodes of the past that were sudden and very big. So, for instance, in Hungary, it was just 2 years, or in Germany, it was Weimar Republic, it was just 2 years. So this had been going on for a very long time. So since the 70s and then 80s and 90s, so people lived with inflation every day. So they knew that, yeah, I'm better to buy stuff now before the prices starts increasing again tomorrow. So everything was in the society was made to live with the fact that inflation was going on, and everybody knew that that's just some fact of Brazil, and there's inflation and you cannot change it. But what they did was ask 2 American economists. What time is it now? Yeah, almost done. So 2 American economists, and they said, okay, what we have to do is change expectations. So they said the following. So first of all, you have to have a balanced budget. You cannot print money. And then we're going to change people's attitude towards money, doing the following. We're going to create a virtual currency that we call Unidad Real de Valor, URV, real unit of value. And by law, we're going to ask all shops and all banks and everything to just, beside the price in cruceros, that was the currency back then, put the price in URV. And we are going to say that by law that the price in URV doesn't change. So people would go to buy, say, an apple, and they would see that the price of an apple in cruceros was 1 cruceros, then 3 cruceros, then 15 cruceros. But the price of one apple with respect to our URV was always the same. And this went on for a while, from the month of March until July, and people just said that, oh yeah, it looks like the URV doesn't change. There's no inflation in URV. There's just inflation in cruceros. And then just casually, the government says, okay, now we see that cruceros seems to be something that's stable. So now let's just introduce the fiat version of the URV. So that's the real version of the URV was the real, so the real, and it's still used today in Brazil, and it totally worked. So people say, oh yeah, if we use this real currency, it doesn't have inflation, and that was enough. So that's a genius plan to change expectations. So they got to get rid of inflation without having to anchor the money to anything, as long, of course, as the government balances its budget. All right, so that was that was Brazil. So next time we start with read the Kagan model, and it would be the last thing we say. And also, please, if you have comments, or not comments, but if you have questions, please send them to me. So so because it's 2 classes again next time. So one half class is Kagan model, and then the other half I'm going to, I would like to talk about chapter 2 since it's a big chapter and you probably have questions. So please review it and send me questions about it. All right, so you can go in peace.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.